You know, this word is a word that Jesus used. As you recall the scene, Jesus is on his knees in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night he would be betrayed and arrested and eventually put on a cross. And you know what? He's on his knees, sweating literally tears of blood. It's a medical situation that's really real when you're in intense stress. And he's down here, and you remember the prayer? He cries out, "Father, let this cup pass from me." Quite literally, Dad, Daddy, don't let them do this to me. Dad, please don't let me go through this. God, help me to escape this. And it's the first time recorded ever in Scripture where someone, anyone, was so intimate to say, Dad, Daddy. And yet Jesus used this word, Abba. And you know what? It must have been very uncomfortable as Peter, James, and John sat there and listened to him pray and call the Father, the distanced God, the one that we couldn't get near in the tabernacle, the one that we had to do certain things in the temple to approach him, to call him Dad. And yet they replicated it in their discussions with each other and down through the 30 and 50 years after Jesus to now Paul is saying that to you and to me. Because the invitation is this. The invitation is to see God as Daddy. And you know what? He goes on here to talk a little bit about that to just close it out. He says, here's the deal. You and I, he says, we are no longer a slave, right? Because a slave is all about rules and regulations. A slave is all about do these 5 things over here and don't do these 4 things. Go to these 2 places, but don't go to these 3 places or suffer the consequences. A slave is, I'm going to be your master. You do what I say. I'm going to be your dictator. I'm going to rule your life because you work for me and I am over you. He says, you're no longer a slave. He says, you know what? So if you've got any of those attitudes of seeing God as a dictator, if you've got anything that's in your prayer life of seeing God as some slavish taskmaster over you, if you've got anything in you of seeing God as rules and regulations or else, he says, you know what? That's what Christmas is here to change in you, in me. Because he says that's not what it's about. He says you're no longer a slave, but you are, look at what it says at the end of verse 6, God's child.